the fact of the matter is, you got to go out and talk to people, ask them for their vote, and you can't, and you've got to do that in every region of the state. And that's the way I've campaigned when I won the seat in 2006. It's the way I tried to be a lieutenant governor, be active and visible in different regions of the state. And I know that the governor shares that same approach. So, every election is a little bit different in terms of the personalities and some of the dynamics, but I think one adage holds true, and this election reinforces it. You've got to be out talking to people, listening to their concerns, and I think giving a reason and rationale as to why you want to govern or continue to govern, and that's what I take out of it. There's anxiety out there, there's fear, and some quarters there's anger as it relates to the economy, and I think it's hard to say this was a referendum on any one thing. I think there's a whole combination of factors out there that contributed to this, and we've been working hard to try to deal with Governor Patrick and I some of the excesses of excess spending or irresponsible spending. The amount of debt that we've inherited. And just take the transportation system. We inherited $20 billion. That was not our figure. That was a bipartisan Transportation Finance Commission report, which Governor Romney designated the chair. And that was because the previous administrations were not engaging as a pay-as-you-go approach. Charlie Baker was an architect of much of that big dig financing plan and borrowing against future federal dollars. And that is why that's a major factor in this $20 billion. MBTA, principal and interest, $8.5 billion in debt. The Turnpike, principal and interest, about $3 billion in debt. So those are the things we've inherited, not to mention structurally deficient bridges, road and rail infrastructure that's hasn't had such things as ordinary maintenance or, So we've worked hard to try to address a lot of those concerns. And in terms of the spending issue, our average budget has increased 0.06%. Compare that to 16 years of Republican governors, where the average increase in the budget was 4.6%. We're projecting growth this year at a conservative level of 3.2%. So we're not spending what we project the growth to be. Our growth in the budget is 3%. We're a conservative estimate of what growth would be next year is 3.2%. The two instances that you're talking about is eliminating the sales tax exemption on candy and tobacco, which we know are major drivers in healthcare costs, which taxpayers pay, and we're dedicating the revenue for those two areas towards health maintenance and public health programs. So I think there is kind of a correlation there. To the governor's credit, he isn't someone that says, "Here, Secretary Bialecki, you do this. Secretary, A&F, you do." They come back with their recommendations, and then he would literally sit in the room and go through those line item by line item, so he had a full understanding of the impact of those cuts, talking about strategies on how to mitigate them, how you might collapse and consolidate agencies to be more efficient, so you're preserving basic services. So that's a lot of time in the building, going over what what I call the blocking and tackling in government. So he's not out talking to people around the state as much as I know he wants to be and likes to be. He's in the building, and so part of that is he hasn't. Well, he's been doing that work of governing. He hasn't been able to go out and talk to everyone that I think he would like to on a regular basis about education reform, which we've been working on. We got done a week and a half ago. About pension reform and ethics reform and transportation reform, all things that were talked about over the last 16 years, but he led and we did. And how long have they been talking about merging the Turnpike Authority with Mass Highway and DCR Road and Bridges? For 20 years. He did ethics reform, pension reform, and people say they want change. Well, I would say reform is change, and so I think part of campaigns are getting out and talking to people about what you've done and why and how it's going to make a difference. We've been working working closely with the delegation here to try to stiffen and hold utility companies such as Unitil accountable and increasing the fine. So we've been working with Representative Flanagan and Senator Flanagan and Representative Benson and Di Natale and the whole legislative delegation to try to prevent that type of thing from happening again, making sure that they actually have emergency management plans that aren't just pieces of paper, but things that they can actually put into implementation. You know, there are a number of muni companies, I know Holden and other communities in the area, the affected area, were up and running, but I think it introduces an element of competition, which is always a good thing as well. So I think it makes some sense, and hopefully it's a piece of legislation that can move.
What do you think the major roadblocks would be to that?
Well, I'm sure some of the existing utility companies, like National, like NSTAR and Unitil, probably have their people running around trying to block it. But I think it's a good thing to have an element of competition. And you know, we're working with some of the munis, you know, what's the Massachusetts State Umbrella Organization?
Municipal wholesaler.
Yeah,
MWIC.
Yeah, MWIC. On some renewable, you know, they're looking to do some renewable things in cooperation with the state and some of our quasis. I mean, I take us, you know, the first person to get elected to statewide office from Worcester County in 50 years, and I see part of my job is to make sure cabinet secretaries and decision makers and even people in the greater Boston business community are aware of the opportunities and values that exist out here in terms of affordability. And so that's why the investments in the rail are so important. If we can have so that we've got 25 trains on a daily basis going from North Station to downtown Fitchburg within an hour with some express trains, and people know the value what they can get for a house here compared to Boston or any of the immediate suburbs, that's an incredibly affordable option and attractive option. Now, what we've got to do is make sure when we're talking to companies in, you know, Boston, Cambridge, you know, area they're looking to grow and expand, to say, look, you've got real value in North Central or in Worcester or in other parts, as opposed to them going to South or somewhere else. And that kind of works both ways, not just on the housing, but also back office operations that maybe don't need to be in a financial district. Maybe they can be out, you know, 40, 50 miles, and you know, there's less pressure on wage and other types of costs.
For a lot of states, their economic development strategy is to find good companies elsewhere and get them to come here. Right. And we're in a very different place in Massachusetts because actually we do a great job of, we have a lot of entrepreneurial people. We start a lot of great companies here all the time. And our big win for us is if our great small companies grew here, that's how we'd add the most jobs. So, but it's all the same points the Lieutenant Governor just made, but it's just the audience. So for example, as he says, part of it is it's convincing the Boston-based company that, or Cambridge-based, the research, right? And then they say, well, we now got a product, we're approved for manufacturing, we're going to go manufacture, and the mindset is, oh, well, I guess we got to move out of Massachusetts to manufacture. So we have to say, well, time out, wait a minute, let us tell you about the other parts of the state that maybe you haven't known about.
We have a Planned Parenthood that built a new facility in Pleasant Street in Worcester. You know, they have a right to be there as much as anyone else, but I think the issue in rebuilding a downtown is critical mass, getting a mix of people with disposable income, giving people opportunities where to live and work, and giving people options of where they can live and work. And I think I was talking about this with Bob Antonucci earlier today as well, and the mayor, we chatted about this. I mean, this is, I think, a huge opportunity for Fitchburg. And how are we planning for it now? For that day when we have the trains, how are we marketing it? How are we starting to talk to businesses? How are we talking to real estate developers as Fitchburg State comes down North Street? Science building gets built. How do you bring those students, that energy, that activity down closer to the intermodal transportation center? How do you kind of build out a vision of what that whole area, how does it affect Main Street? I think there's a huge opportunity here to kind of build a momentum and a plan, and we're working to try to assist that. I think it's important that we look at this, and whether it be anti-bullying programs, legislation that certainly want to do more to encourage and let peers know the consequences of this, but also where we need to be able to prosecute and hold people accountable. Let me just give you an example of how I think we can do this. I chair the Interagency Council on Domestic Violence and Sexual Abuse, and right now you can only take a restraining order out against somebody if they're stalking you or harassing you if you've lived with them or had a relationship with them or something in the past. So there had to have been some type of relationship or something that existed. So there's legislation now, which the governor and I support, that would give people the ability, we know from unfortunate murders and cases that sometimes somebody just sees you and all of a sudden they are attracted to issues and they stalk and sometimes have killed people. Well, if someone knows they have the ability now to take out a restraining order, we'll have the ability to take out a restraining order against in that type of situation. So I think there's got to be things that we can do where there's a pattern, a consistent pattern, a premeditated pattern of harassing, misrepresenting, intimidating people that we could fashion here that gives some level of discretion but also allows us to hold people accountable when there's a clear pattern or intent in a premeditated fashion to threaten or hurt someone.
The other point that Lieutenant Governor made as part of the message you got is so important. There's 260,000 people in manufacturing. Given the age of those folks, it's estimated that 100,000 of them will retire in the next 5 to 10 years. So even if that sector doesn't grow, we need 100,000 young people in this job. I guess another measure, if you talk to the folks, every Voc Tech school that I've been to around the state that has a manufacturing group, whatever you call it, they're even in the teeth of this economy, 100% of those kids are getting jobs. Hasn't that been your experience? There's a need and there's plenty of work in that area, and we're actually more focused on the supply. The companies are selling us, don't worry about find us young people who are willing to do manufacturing and have the skills that we need, and we'll put them to work. And that it's really the supply and the issue, not the demand is there, no question.